The time is at hand.
From the flooded banks of the Tug Fork River in Williamson, West Virginia, you are in dark places. I'm a little late getting this episode out because we got a big flood here. Me, my wife, Brandon, we're all safe. We didn't get flooded. The house survived. The pets are fine, except for our guppies. We lost all those because we have not had power. The flood hit on February 15th, and then our power went off on February 16th. Power didn't come back on until February 18th. So, a little late getting this episode put together because I've not had any power. Sorry about that. I actually recorded the stories for this episode a couple weeks ago. It's a little longer than what I've been doing recently, and it took a while to do some editing on it. So it was going to be late anyway, just not this late because of the flood. And yeah, that flood. The biggest flood on record here was the 1977 flood. I was 16 months old, and I remember that. Weird. I remember seeing houses and cars and stuff floating down the river. It was pretty messed up. And then, up until now, the second biggest flood was the 1984 flood. It was almost as big as the 77 flood. And there were houses floating down the river for that flood too. I remember that one too. But now this flood of 2025, it was bigger than the 84 flood, but not as big as the 77 flood. That thing tore up Jack though. It closed all the stores in town. Everyone got flooded, except for the store where I work, and Dairy Queen, McDonald's, and CVS. So basically everyone within a 50-mile radius has been flocking in droves into my store and working us to death there. A lot of people I know lost their homes, lost everything they had. So let's keep those folks in your prayers. Our friend James was telling me about a charity group called the United Cajun Navy. They were helping the folks in Tennessee and North Carolina with the hurricane, and now they're up here in West Virginia, Kentucky, Virginia, helping out all the flood victims. So thanks to those guys. We need more of that. Let's quit depending on the government for everything, because the government never helps us. I'm going to put a link in the description for the United Cajun Navy so you can donate and try to help the flood victims. I would just give the address and let you grab a pen and paper and write it down like in the olden days. But these websites have weird addresses. Notice that? We've got donate.united-kv.org/B/2AOCNW6NLGK, and it just goes on and on. So I think it'd be easier to just put the link in the description thing. You think so? There's been a lot of talk in recent years and months and so forth of UFO disclosure. The U.S. government has long denied any interest in UFOs, yet keeps thousands of UFO documents on its secret list. William Spalding tells how the cover was blown and reveals a bizarre CIA plot to mislead the public. This week on the show, the UFO Cover-up. UFO researchers have long maintained that their governments know more about the UFO phenomenon than they officially admit. One reason for thinking this has been the unfailing skeptical attitude taken by government officials when questioned about any particular sighting. Even the best documentary reports are greeted with cries of weather balloons or the planet Venus seen under unusual conditions. Another cause for suspicion has been the peculiar interest that UFOs take in military establishments from time to time. Some, at least, of the infamous Men in Black may have been genuine government agents, and the thought may linger in many ufologists' minds that the Men in Black's elusive nature is only the smoke of folklore behind which lurks the sinister fire of clandestine operations. In the United States, the idea of a deliberate government attack on ufology was confirmed for many by the publication in 1969 of the Condon Report, widely regarded as at best complacent or, at worst, willfully ignorant. Documents obtained by Ground Saucer Watch from the United States government under the Freedom of Information Act now confirm that there has indeed been a cover-up right from the start of the modern UFO era in the late 1940s. But what is revealed by the documents is not that there is a worldwide plot to hide the true nature of UFOs involving secret contact with extraterrestrials, or some gruesome conspiracy against humanity, or some other outlandish suggestion. What is indicated, rather, is that the United States government wishes to maintain a certain public attitude toward UFOs. This atmosphere of doubt and derision has been created in a number of ways. Anyone can offer more or less plausible explanations for a UFO sighting. Bright planets, unusual atmospheric conditions, meteorites, aircraft, and so on. This approach cannot help but be successful, since as many as 95% of alleged UFOs are indeed misinterpretations of known objects. Some skeptical investigators maintain that if these statistics are valid, then all UFO reports must represent objects that could be identified, or sufficient information on each sighting available. How can a man in the street argue with logic like that? The debunking campaign has been successful too, because well-known military or government figures have weighed in against the UFO. Most public have an automatic respect for public figures whose statements are easily accepted. Few researchers who believed that they saw through the screen of official denials were easily dismissed as mavericks or cranks. There was, according to the official line, nothing to research. The government knew about everything there was to be seen in the sky. But perhaps the cover-up was so successful because no one could prove it was going on. There was no hard evidence to back the claim that the government was not being completely honest with the public. And if the government knows so much, why haven't ex-employees came forward with their stories? Revelations far more explosive, potentially, than any political scandal. Yet fewer than a dozen such individuals have come forward. Despite all this, one's suspicions remain. Over the years, GSW, that was those guys over at Ground Saucer Watch, have encountered numerous incidents that showed every sign of direct or indirect government interference. Photographs went missing. Ground markings were plowed under. Occasional witnesses talked about the visits from military or intelligence officers who wanted to suppress the story of their UFO encounter. Too many cases came to an abrupt halt because some of the evidence was missing, making it impossible to reach a firm conclusion. Largely at the insistence of Todd Zeckel, GSW's director of research and himself an ex-member of the intelligence community, it was decided to attack an issue head-on and approach the government directly. In the first place, GSW questioned the U.S. Air Force, with predictable results. Typical replies were the phenomenon does not represent any advanced technology beyond our present capability and poses no direct threat to the United States, and there is no evidence indicating that sightings categorized as unidentified are extraterrestrial vehicles. This was more than expected. The next step was to confront the CIA, the agency most likely to be involved in suppressing UFO material. The CIA's reply, in a letter to GSW dated on March 26, 1976, is intriguing in the light of later events. In order that you may be aware of the true facts concerning the involvement of the CIA in the investigation of the UFO phenomena, let me give you the following brief history. Late in 1952, the National Security Council levied upon the CIA the requirement to determine if the existence of UFOs would create a danger to the security of the United States. The Office of Scientific Intelligence established the Intelligence Advisory Committee to study the matter. That committee made the recommendations in the Robertson Panel Report. At no time prior to the formation of the Robertson Panel and subsequent to this issuance of the panel's report in January 1953, as the CIA engaged in the study of UFO phenomena. The Robertson Panel Report is the summation of the agency's interest and involvement in this matter. The Robertson Panel's conclusion, after an intensive briefing by top airmen, astronomers, and several CIA men, were simple. There was no cause for alarm, militarily or scientifically, but, significantly for our case, the panel concluded that the continued emphasis on the reporting of these phenomena does, in these perilous times, result in a threat to the orderly functioning of the protective organs of the body politic. Their recommendations were framed accordingly: debunk UFOs and educate people to recognize aerial phenomena. In fact, the CIA did not let the matter drop there and then in 1953. Searches through the National Archives had shown that many reports were missing from the files. Dozens more letters to the agencies and even the White House simply elicited the same official response, essentially that UFOs did not exist. Why then the missing documents? When GSW made specific requests under the Freedom of Information Act, a few papers were released, and so highly sanitized that only a mind reader could have made sense of some of them. GSW then decided to attack in the courts. After 14 months of grueling legal action, the government released December 15, 1978, close to 1,000 pages of documents. It was a major victory for GSW and ufology in general. What did the paper show? First, that CIA involvement in UFOs actually predates the National Security Council directive to set up what became the Robertson Panel. Indeed, it was the CIA that urged an investigation on the council.
Urge. I've got the urge. She's got the urge to burble. She ran the rebel in the shower.
Urge. Second, the implications for psychological warfare attract considerable attention. As one memo puts it, a fair proportion of our population is mentally conditioned to the acceptance of the incredible. In this fact lies the potential for the touching off of mass hysteria and panic. The third concern is with the vulnerability of U.S. air defenses. At any moment of attack, we cannot distinguish hardware from phantom. The use of the word phantom is interesting here for another memo. From the Deputy Director for Intelligence, CIA, dated November 1952, says bluntly, sightings of unexplained objects at great altitudes and traveling at high speeds in the vicinity of major U.S. defense installations are of such a nature that they are not attributable to natural phenomena or known types of aerial vehicles. In the light of that, it is not surprising that when Edward Toss, the acting chief of the Weapons and Equipment Division of the Office of Scientific Intelligence, recommended that the CIA continue coverage on the subject in August 1952. He should add, it is strongly urged.
Urge. I've got the urge.
However, that no indication of CIA interest or concern reached the press or public in view of their probability alarmist tendencies to accept such interest as conformity of their soundness of unpublished facts in the hands of the U.S. government. It is clear, then, that the government, or the CIA at least, believed in the reality of the UFO phenomenon. It was also alarmed by it, and it was determined to keep what it did know to itself. Nor was the report of the Robertson Panel the last word, though the CIA pretended to accept its findings. The U.S. Air Force, after all, maintained Project Blue Book until 1969, after the Condon Committee published its findings. Though whether Blue Book was ever told the whole truth, either by the U.S. Air Force itself or other defense agencies, remains in some doubt. The probable fate of the film, taken by the U.S. Navy warrant officer Delbert C. Newhouse in 1952, the Tremonton movie that was shown to the Robertson Panel, is one indication of the CIA's true reaction to the evidence. This film has been subject to several attempts at debunking. According to the witness, it shows a number of unusual craft traveling at enormous speed, some 10 miles from the camera. Newhouse's report of the incident is confirmed by GSW's computerized tests on the film, as it was by the U.S. Air Force Photo Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, who first analyzed it. The film was then handed to the Naval Photographic Interpretation Center at Anacostia, Maryland, and subjected to over 1,000 man-hours of study. The Navy had no explanation for the objects, but said they appeared to be self-luminous spheres traveling at up to 7,560 miles per hour. The Robertson panel argued over the film for about 2 hours. They were also shown film of seagulls giving intense reflections of light in bright sunshine. The panel duly reported that the objects were considered strongly to represent birds. Who laid on that film of seagulls? Was it the CIA, experienced hands as they were at manipulation and suggestion? What they did not do was stop studying films or UFOs. As soon as the Robertson panel had reported NAVPIC, that's the Naval Photographic Interpretation Center, NAVPIC was dissolved. Some of its members, however, were moved to the CIA to form the National Photographic Interpretation Center, NPIC. Material dating from at least 1950 is kept there, says GSW's Todd Zeckel. There is a direct link between NAVPIC's work on the Tremleton analysis and the decision of the CIA to place the analysis program under its direct authority. In other words, rather than thinking the Tremleton analysis was an error, as had been purported, the CIA was impressed enough to immediately transfer the project to its headquarters. Small wonder, then, that the U.S. Air Force's Project Blue Book got such short shrift. According to Todd Zeckel, Blue Book was in reality no more than a PR front, primarily covering for the secret research being conducted by the CIA. To give Blue Book full support would have been a waste, since it would have been duplicating research already being conducted by the CIA. Therefore, and for the most part unwittingly, Blue Book's facade enabled the CIA to pull off the greatest propaganda fraud in history. The documents obtained by GSW support the view that the CIA has persisted in UFO research. Among them are numerous reports dutifully filed by U.S. embassies abroad of UFO sightings. 25 cases from Spain alone in one 9-month period between 1973 and 1974. A case from Portugal, multiple events in Tanzania in 1976 with many witnesses, radar trafficking, and police reports. A very concerned Chief of Military Security, General Balma, wanted to know if the U.S. Sixth Fleet could shed any light on who or what they might be. Not only was this innumerable other cases being reported in 1976, 7 years after the U.S. government had supposedly given up its interest in UFOs in the wake of the Condon Report, but all UFO reports from the embassies are sent to the CIA and the even more shadowy Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Council, the Security of Defense, and the Security of State. Of course, it is in the government's interests to pretend that it can identify everything in the sky. The security of the Western Alliance depends on that assumption. But the evidence indicates that the cover-up does not stop at a desire to prevent alarm and despondency from spreading among the people. Just the opposite. If you happen to witness a UFO, agents from the CIA, Directorate of Operations, and Domestic Operations Division, sometimes called the Contact Division, have been known to harass, intimidate, and silence people. Further to this, a more sinister game is perhaps being played out. For while the intelligence services attempt to deflate the UFO controversy, it would seem that they are also helping to feed it. The Marine, the CIA, and the UFO. One of the oddest UFO cases on record is the 1952 sighting by U.S. Marine Ralph Mayer. It is odd not because of the sighting itself, which was as normal as any other UFO event, but because of what happened afterward to Mayer and the film he managed to take. Ralph Mayer had heard that on the night of July 28, 1952, a couple named Goldstein had seen a flying saucer near their home. He was an experienced movie photographer and was interested in UFOs, so he arranged to meet the Goldsteins the next day and rented a camera. He had a theory that saucers sometimes appear on consecutive nights. At 9:30 p.m. on July 29th, Mayer heard a woman across the street shout that a UFO was in view. The Goldsteins and another neighbor, Herman Stern, also saw the object, which remained visible over the ocean for about 3 minutes. Mayer managed to shoot only some 40 frames of film because his view was obscured by trees and buildings. The object was traveling horizontally toward the witnesses, then turned and shot away. Mayer had this film processed at once, as his unit commander had no objections, released some frames to the Miami press, and even recorded a radio interview. But within 48 hours, U.S. Air Force investigators were on the scene, and that threw a security blanket over the case. Mayer was visited by a number of men with CIA credentials, who apparently told him to keep quiet about the event. On inquiry, Mayer was also told that the U.S. Air Force thought the pinpoints of light too small to analyze properly, but the film was never returned. Perhaps the strangest part of the story is that while well-informed UFO investigators like Major Donald Kehoe heard nothing of the film, ace debunker Dr. Donald Menzel soon became familiar with it, with surreal inventiveness. Menzel said it showed a cobweb. GSW's computer analysis indicates that the object is solid, 50 feet in diameter, and traveling at 2,500 miles per hour. For decades, ufology has been in a state of confusion and disarray, struggling to research a phenomenon for which there is only slender evidence, says William H. Spalding. Thanks, William. And the reason: secret government agencies have been manipulating the evidence and the witnesses. What conclusions can we draw from the documents that GSW has drawn from the CIA and the State Department? To answer that question, we first have to look objectively at some salient facts about the state of ufology, for that is the raw material that the CIA has used to its advantage over the years in its campaign of debunking disinformation and calculated manipulation. In the first place, most information about UFOs is based on the usually unsupported word of the witness. In many instances, this type of report is labeled authentic by the pro-UFO community after an investigation that usually amounts to little more than a conversation with the participants. The ability of the witness to identify unusual aerial phenomena is notoriously unreliable. Take, for example, the numerous cases of dome-shaped, spinning saucer-like craft that perform extraordinary maneuvers and display unusual lighting configurations reported by numerous reliable individuals and turn out to be aircraft towing advertising material. Lack of time, money, and effective research techniques all contribute to the large element of foul-up in ufology. On the other hand, not all UFO events can be categorized as identifiable. There is a small residue of events that seem to be caused by real objects, or what appear to be real objects. Blue Book estimated these at some 3% of the total. Civilian investigators put that figure at about 8%. Probably the true figure is somewhere in between, but relatively little can be done to investigate these cases scientifically. There are a few physical traces to take into the laboratory. What does seem certain is that no event represents a visitation from outer space. The mathematical odds are simply too remote for the extraterrestrial hypothesis to be taken seriously. Whatever true UFOs are, they would appear to have a distinctly earthly origin. Even so, the transparent ineffectiveness of the official ineptitude of the special commissions and the constant stonewalling of the government led many civilian researchers to believe that a massive conspiracy was at work to cover up the government's knowledge of contact from outer space. In the 1940s, rumors of crashed saucers and dead aliens were rife. In the 70s, there were contactee and abduction stories galore. Not only that, but odd leaks and whispers of information came the way of the research groups from seemingly well-placed military and intelligence sources. What other conclusion was there to draw? Who else but aliens could be behind these tantalizing stories? Undoubtedly, the government, as embodied in the CIA, has been involved in a cover-up, as we have seen in the previous article. But what we are about to suggest is that while the CIA was collecting UFO information from around the globe, though claiming to be doing nothing of the kind, it was also manufacturing the rumor that the government knew more than it was prepared to admit. This tactic was employed partly to distract ufologists' attention from what the government was actually up to, and partly to add to the disarray of ufology. Behind the smokescreen of confusion and ignorance that it created, the CIA would proceed with its own outlandish, would be further disguised by the fact that they seemed no weirder than the rest of the whole bizarre phenomenon. And such activity will be just as intractable to scientific investigation, whether by the U.S. Air Force or by civilians. And this is fundamental, that the U.S. Air Force's investigations, for example, should be kept secret. Clues of what really came to fascinate the CIA about the UFO question are scattered throughout the documents obtained by GSW. Of course, the government's conspirators of silence may not be from the CIA. They may be from the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Agency, or the super-secret National Reconnaissance Organization, or some clandestine group within any of these. Though the evidence to hand points to the CIA, the precise identity of the culprits is unimportant as long as the principles on which they seem to be working remain obscure. From the first, the CIA was intrigued by the psychological implications of the flying saucer mystery. This is part of one memorandum from 1952. With worldwide sightings reported, it was found that up to the time of this investigation, there had been in the Soviet press no report or comment on flying saucers. With a state-controlled press, this could only result from official policy decision. The question therefore arises as to whether or not these sightings, 1, could be controlled, 2, could be predicted, and 3, could be used from a psychological warfare point of view, either defensively or offensively. A fair proportion of our population is mentally conditioned to the acceptance of the incredible. These concerns were echoed in the secret report of the Robertson Panel in 1953, after which the CIA took over the real business of UFO investigation. At this time, the documents show the CIA's Office of Scientific Intelligence was privately convinced that UFOs were extraterrestrial craft. While awaiting proof of this, a debunking campaign was designed to diffuse any potential public hysteria. Everyone expected that UFOs, like any other fad, would thus be helped to evaporate from the public consciousness. But at some point, perhaps when the extraterrestrial hypothesis was discarded, or perhaps when it became indisputable that UFOs were not simply a passing craze, or perhaps with the growth of secret high-technology research, the agency realized that it could conduct experiments in psychological warfare of its own. If the Soviets were not behind the sightings in an attempt to manipulate the populace, there was no reason why the CIA should not get behind them instead. The benefits would be manifold. The military could get on with its secret aerial projects in comfort, since anyone coming unwittingly in contact with them would fall foul of the CIA's disinformation service and public debunking routine, and the CIA would discover just how far public attitudes could be manipulated, how individuals reacted to bizarre and unprecedented events, and how the information was disseminated and what reactions it generated. This paradoxical program of simultaneous encouragement and discouragement of the UFO controversy would work on several fronts. The idea of a cover-up would be nurtured through leaks or classified information to civilian investigators, while a number of events could, quite simply, be staged. A number of agents infiltrating the research organizations would be able to feed disinformation to the UFO groups and, at the same time, monitor their awareness of secret military hardware. Friends in the press would dutifully play up UFO material, whether it were a hoax, misidentification, or staged event. This program is what GSW calls the Federal Hypothesis. It would not require especially large resources to be effective, since only one small number, no more than the unexplained 5% of events, need to be created. A network of enthusiasts would do the rest. As the ripples spread out from ufologists, a segment of the public would respond with psychic experiences, fantasies, a smattering of hoaxes, and numerous induced misinterpretations of aircraft, birds, and planets. Another flap would be underway, and a similar pattern of manipulation could be used to cover up mishaps with the military equipment or explain away occasional instances of its illegal testing. Once the technique was established, there would be no reason not to use it to distract public attention from political embarrassment at home or abroad. How far can we prove the Federal Hypothesis? The documents obtained under the Freedom of Information Act reveal the CIA's persistent interest in psychological warfare. Is it coincidence that several members of the Board of Governors of the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, NICAP, are former members of the CIA? One Colonel Joseph Bryan, III, U.S. Air Force retired, is actually reputed to have been the founder of the CIA Psychological Warfare Section. Another NICAP officer, Nicholas de Rochefort, had come to the CIA through its predecessor, the Office of Strategic Services, and was also an expert in psychological warfare. No less telling in GSW's view is the decision by the Aerial Phenomenon Research Organization in 1974 to concentrate solely on contact and abduction cases, which may have led them straight into the hands of the manipulators. How many other UFO organizations have been infiltrated? How many other publications have been fed stories? There is evidence that Gene Urso Pope, an owner of the National Enquirer, was an ex-CIA member and an associate of the Covert Action Staff, Disinformation and Propaganda, of the CIA's Operations Directorate, Clandestine Services, and who has paid the highest sums for the most exotic and sensational UFO stories, and so helped shape American popular opinion. But the National Enquirer, such a technique is standard with the CIA. In December 1977, the New York Times reported that in the mid-60s, the CIA owned, subsidized, or otherwise influenced more than 800 news and public information organizations and individuals. It is also significant that UFO stories undergo reincarnation. The crashed saucer tales of the 1940s came to light once again in the 1980s, while the fashion for contactee experiences of the early 1950s recurred in the 1970s. In a more sinister vein, what kind of psychological manipulation may have been involved in close encounter cases? How many times have we all heard a baffled researcher say, in honesty, that the event was real in the mind of the witness, despite a total lack of supporting evidence? Anonymity guaranteed. At a UFO conference held at Fort Smith, Arkansas in 1974, the research group APRO announced that henceforth it was intending to concentrate solely on contactee and abduction cases. Whether this was out of boredom with run-of-the-mill UFO sightings or because APRO hoped to gain publicity is not known. Some of the cases APRO has espoused are highly questionable, the Walton abduction case being but one instance. Here is another. In February 1981, Ground Saucer Watch received from APRO an anonymous letter purporting to come from a U.S. airman. It described a UFO landing near Kirtland Air Force Base, New Mexico. An individual in a metallic suit got out, got in again, and the craft flew away. A Civil Air Patrol cadet, one Craig R. Wetzel, apparently took photographs of the landing. Later he was, the letter said, visited by men in black, which Wetzel reported to the Air Force Security Police, who in turn notified the Kirtland Air Force Base Office of Special Investigations. A Mr. Doty then looked into the matter, though the letter writer claimed that Doty later disavowed all knowledge of the incident. The letter writer also claimed that his commanding officer, one Colonel Bruce Purvine, had admitted to him that OSI was investigating UFO sightings in the greatest secrecy. Mention was also made of crashed saucers, some of which are supposedly kept in the Sandia area of Kirkland Air Force Base. Ground Saucer Watch did what it could to check this report, which confirmed the existence of the Sandia area and of Mr. Doty of the OSI. Colonel Purvine expressed some astonishment that he should be reported as discussing classified information with enlisted men, and denied discussing UFOs at all with anyone. He also pointed out that the airman had got the name of Colonel Purvine's command quite wrong, who led APRO up the garden path. Is a government conspiracy really at the root of the UFO mystery? Having studied the documents obtained by Ground Saucer Watch, Peter Brooksmith suggests why the CIA and the U.S. military might indeed have embarked on such a program of deception. Thanks, Peter. I suggest that we discuss at an early board meeting the possible offensive or defensive utilization of these phenomena for psychological warfare purposes. The subject of the secret memorandum in which this sentence appeared was flying saucers. It was written in the early 1950s by Walter B. Smith, director of the CIA, to the director of the Psychological Strategy Board, and it would appear that in the intervening years the CIA, or possibly some other clandestine agency, has indeed been using the UFO phenomenon in a form of psychological warfare, and the objects of the CIA's attention have been the citizens of the United States. This is, to say the least, a disturbing proposition, but there are several reasons why the U.S. government might want to encourage a belief in UFOs, and then manipulate that belief among the populace at large. By looking at specific aspects of the UFO phenomenon as we now understand it, these reasons become clear. In the first place, the United States has a massive investment in military technology, especially in the field of airborne weapons. And while the armed services have literally thousands of square miles of desert and scrub in which to test craft such as the radar-defeating stealth aeroplane, remotely piloted vehicles, unusual aerofoil configurations, and even biochemical weapons, there are occasions when these need to be tested in unrestricted areas. The advantage of a general willingness to believe in UFOs is inestimable in such a case. Take the stealth aircraft, for instance. Development work on an airplane that can make itself virtually invisible to radar had been going on since at least 1966. The project was classified in 1977, but pictures released by Boeing showed a small, oddly shaped bomber resembling nothing so much as a paper dart, unusual enough perhaps to be taken for a UFO even in the daylight. But in 1975, a mobile radar unit of the United States Air Force in California picked up a target flying at 460 miles per hour from Edwards Air Force Base. Then it turned, and in one step of the radar had vanished. This was taken to mean that it had accelerated instantly to over 2,000 miles per hour, typical UFO behavior. In fact, the target was a stealth aircraft on test, and had switched to its invisible mode just after it came on screen. Officially, it was logged as unidentified, one part of the U.S. Air Force seeing no need for another part to know what it was doing. The foundations of the UFO myth were made a little stronger, and the secret aircraft remained secret. The presence of moles from the intelligence community within UFO organizations will further ensure that no really vital information can leak to the outside world without first being carefully distorted. In much the same way, what looks like an overenthusiastic and ill-informed reaction on the part of the press officer and the U.S. Army Air Force has been kept alive as evidence as an alien saucer that supposedly crashed in New Mexico in July 1947, just days after the first polyethylene research balloons were launched from the nearby White Sands Proving Ground. More sinister are the unexplained cases of cattle mutilization associated with UFO sightings, reported from the USA. The operations on these animals are always said to have been done with unnerving neatness. It is possible, and if one accepts the notion of a government UFO conspiracy, it is probable that this surgery is performed on animals that have been exposed to biochemical weapons. On this theory, the government is deliberately reinforcing the belief in the incredible or the paranormal origin of the mutilization. It may be doing this to camouflage its tests of biochemical weapons and of the extent to which their use is detectable by experienced farmers and veterinarian surgeons. Or it may be using UFO mythology to disguise gruesome incompetence by the military, the unintentional injury of cattle by its toxic materials. A more direct form of experiment in aggressive psychology may lie behind the murky history of the Men in Black. It is altogether likely that the CIA has actually staged a number of UFO events, especially contact and abduction cases. The recurrent claim of Men in Black victims that no one but they knew of the sighting would then be a delusion. Men in Black, having in fact set it up, it would serve the interests of psychological warfare to know how people react to empty threats. The Men in Black, after all, never seem to follow through their promises to maim or silence their unwilling hosts. Similarly, the Men in Black technique could be used to evaluate responses to bizarre, not to say unearthly, behavior. Hence the stream of surreal comments, insane questions, and a social activity that Men in Black like to indulge in. Techniques of surveillance are now so subtle that agents would not have to follow through the visit, which could simply be recorded remotely. Any leakage only adds to the mass of incoherent absurdities that make up most of ufology. So I think we can assume that old Peter Brooksmith is a bit of a skeptic. This absurdity is deliberate, a phenomenon with no logic, yet that undeniably exists. It serves to keep investigators occupied in the hopeless attempt to create a logic, a theory that will tie all the loose ends together. In turn, a very large public will apply its energies to ufology, energies that cannot reach a conclusion. This serves government purposes, any government's purpose. It was apparent very early on that the public was not going to get tired of the UFO question. Even the skeptical Robertson panel gloomily predicted its increase in sightings. The clever solution was to take this direct interest and control it, and hope that a large number of otherwise troublesome people would be kept occupied with the insoluble problem, thus removing some sources of political challenge. A persistent harping on the actually untenable extraterrestrial hypothesis has undoubtedly led to the creation of several pseudo-religions. The adherents of these saucer cults will certainly not berate the government for its mishandling of the economy or foreign policy, since the Galactic Brotherhood will see us right in the end. Public dissatisfaction with the U.S. government's performance was certainly diverted by a UFO event in 1957, an indication of both how quickly and how soon the operation was mounted. At the time, the United States suffered several humiliations, as attempt after attempt to launch its first space vehicle, the Vanguard rocket, ended in disaster. Then, in November 1957, the USSR succeeded in putting a second satellite into orbit, a mere 30 days after the epoch-making Sputnik. Within hours, UFOs appeared over Texas and New Mexico, and elbowed the Soviet achievement out of the headlines. With so much interest in space, the extraterrestrial obsession was given another nudge forward, and national embarrassment was temporarily forgotten. Even abduction cases can serve dual or even triple purpose. It is not difficult to stage a UFO encounter or abduction that is real in the mind of the witness, provided one can get at the victim with drugs, hypnosis, or both. Other special effects would scarcely stretch the resources or ingenuity of a banana republic, let alone the U.S. government. And so the experimenters could add to the UFO myth, test their psychological or hallucinogenic techniques, note whether the victim succumbs entirely, observe how the information is treated by the media, by ufologists, and the public, and, having generated another outrageous story, keep serious scientists away from the UFO scene. The subjective reality of the experience for the witness will also strengthen saucer enthusiasts in their belief that skeptics are ignoring the issue of the century, while the government and scientists are covering up the truth, as they are, but not quite in the way that ufologists first thought. This conspiracy theory will probably be offensive to many ufologists, but one further fact supports it, and that is the total lack of progress that has been made on the question of what true UFOs really are. If researchers could answer that question, the concern with abductions and contact cases, which consumes so much more energy among researchers, would have some purpose. The present state of publicly available knowledge is ably summarized by William H. Spalding, who first raised the federal hypothesis to account for the elusiveness of the phenomenon. What new starting breakthroughs have emerged from the pro-saucer movement? The past 30 years have been wasted attempting to research something that wasn't there in the first place. The fact that the saucer belief system has survived so long with so little logical and evidential support is a testimony to the tenacity of human credulity. The audacity and creativity of the CIA and other researchers in this subject have created 3 generations of enthusiasts and have captured the imagination of the public. What makes the saucer saga so interesting and significant is that it is a genuine psycho-social movement that has been born and is still growing in our own time. A world-famous authority on UFOs once expressed his private belief to the author that the phenomenon was controlled by an intelligence, though whose it was, he was not prepared to say. The answer seems to be that UFOs, in the USA at least, are controlled not so much by an intelligence, but by an intelligence agency. Well, Mr. Brooksmith, we believe. Roswell and after. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the English Air Force Roswell Army Airfield was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the operation of one of the local ranchers in the sheriff's office of Chaves County. Thus began the press release issued by Lieutenant Walter Haut of the U.S. Army Air Force on July 8, 1947, and so the legend of the Roswell incident was born. In fact, what was found was wreckage of a rather unusual type, so unusual, according to Major, later Lieutenant Colonel Jesse A. Marcel, that it was rapidly substituted with the remains of a weather balloon, which he then presented to the press as the material he had found in the New Mexico desert. The case for the flying disc or some extraterrestrial craft being involved is flimsy, to say the least, and based largely on second-hand accounts to boot, while members of a University of Pennsylvania archaeology team who helped gather the wreckage were apparently not contacted by researchers. So what did crash? On July 3, 1947, the approximate date of the crash, the White Sands Missile Range launched both a V-2 rocket and, for the U.S. Army Air Force, the first polyethylene balloon. Either of these, impacting off the range, may have been responsible for the wreckage found in the desert, and would have caused the embarrassed cover-up that followed the ill-advised press notice issued by Lieutenant Halt. Likewise, the accounts of the material as light but very tough and distinctly unfamiliar would be explained. The significance of the incident for ufologists may lie in White Sands on a mission that some 7% of their firings go awry, including heavyweight tactical missiles, like the Pershing one, crashed in 1967 in Van Horn, Texas, 250 miles away. And thanks to that snarky attitude, I think we'll just stop right here. The story is like 30 pages long. So what do you say we do a part 2? Sounds good. We'll see you again right here next week. Thanks for listening, and God bless.